The chamber smelled like recycled air. And something older. Like a room that had absorbed too many agreements and remembered every single one. Admiral Saravos stood at the center of it. Around her, in a half-circle of raised tables, sat 12 delegates from 12 worlds. Some had scales. Some had too many fingers. One breath through slits along its neck that opened and closed in a slow rhythm, like it was counting to itself. Another had no visible face at all, just a smooth surface that tilted toward her when she moved, tracking. She had seen stranger things. She had caused stranger things. The document on the table in front of her was 40 pages, the Cathara Accords. 3 years of talks, 17 formal sessions, 112 draft versions. Humanity had submitted the technical framework themselves as a gesture of good faith. That was what Delegate Huron of the Vel Collective had called it, a gesture of good faith. He had said it 4 times in the final session alone. She pulled a pen from her jacket pocket. Plastic blue, the cheap kind, the kind that came in a box of 50 from a supply shop near the Naval Academy, the kind that dried out if you left the cap off too long. She had bought the same brand for 26 years, always had a box on her desk. Always would. Delegate Huron watched the pen. He had 4 eyes, 2 in front of his face, 2 on the sides. All 4 moved to the pen. At the same time, he held very still. He was a tall creature, narrow-shouldered, with a way of sitting that made him look like he was always about to stand up. He had pushed hard for this moment, had argued for it in front of the full conclave 3 times, had written most of the framework himself, working from the human definitions document. She uncapped the pen. It bled a small drop of ink onto her thumb. She wiped it on the inside of her jacket sleeve where no one would see. She signed. The chamber exhaled, 80-something creatures drawing breath at the same moment, releasing 3 years of tension. In one shared sound, the noise of it moved through the room like the end of something long and heavy. Huron's 4 eyes moved from the pen to her face. She capped the pen, slid it back into her jacket pocket. He was looking for something in her expression. She wasn't sure what. Relief maybe, or defeat, or the particular look of a person who has given up something they valued and knows it. The corner of her mouth moved, just slightly, not quite a smile, something smaller and harder to name. His translation matrix had no word for it. The accords were simple the way that a locked room is simple. The language was clean, the terms were clear. Humanity would decommission all vessels classified as warships under the joint technical framework. Humanity would build no new vessels rated for military engagement under those same definitions. Humanity would open all shipyards and construction yards to quarterly inspection for a period of 10 years. The joint technical framework had been submitted by humanity itself, their own document, their own words, their own definitions. Huron had called it the first real sign that humans understood their place in the wider community of worlds. Voss had nodded at that. She said she agreed. She did agree, just not about which place that was. The message from Commander Dejun Cho came through while she was walking the long corridor to the transport bay. She read it on her data pad without slowing down. Definitions are just agreements. We're good at those. She didn't reply. She put the data pad back in her coat pocket and kept walking. Cho was 38 and had the kind of face that made people assume he was harmless. He had come up through engineering, through the shipyard programs, through 3 tour on vessels that were now being stripped to their frames under the Accords. He was not a big man. He was not a loud man. He had the particular patience of someone who had spent a long time working with machines, the understanding that if you did the right things in the right order, the result would come. He was not angry about the decommissioning. People expected anger. He didn't have it. Not about that. He had been at Vornex 4, not on the bridge, down in the engineering core of the ENS, relentless, both hands on the systems, feeling the ship work the way good machine works, clean, certain. He had felt it fire, felt it absorb hits and answer back. He had watched the readouts climb and fall and climb again. 11 minutes, that was how long the engagement at Vornex 4 had lasted. He didn't think about the 11 minutes. He thought about definitions. He thought about what the Accords said and what the Accords didn't say, and the space between those two things and what could fit in that space if someone was patient enough and precise enough to measure it. Right. Then he went to work. Decommissioning took 8 months, 73 ships, weapons arrays removed, military-grade hull panels stripped, combat-rated drives pulled and cataloged. Some ships were melted down. Some sat in orbital dry dock waiting. The conclave sent observers for every stage. They were thorough. They cross-checked every classification against the framework. They found nothing to object to. They left satisfied. Voss visited the yards once during the decommissioning. She didn't make a speech. She walked the hull of the ENS, bearing her first posting 22 years ago, and put her hand flat on the plating. Cold space metal was always cold. You never really adjusted to it, no matter how long you served. The cold of a ship's hull and dock was a specific kind of cold, not the cold of weather, but the cold of something that had been in the dark. She stood there with her hand against the metal. A young ensign nearby studied the floor with great concentration. Voss took her hand back, walked on. In the same week that the ENS bearing was stripped to its skeleton, the first humanitarian response vessel was laid down in berth 7 at the Ganymede construction facility. The manifest listed it as a civilian emergency response ship. Its purpose, per the filing, disaster relief, medical aid and supply distribution in crisis zones across contested or unstable regions of space. The hull was rated for Class 4 armor plating. The Accords allowed Class 4. The manifest noted this clearly. It did not note how many layers of Class 4 plating would be used. The number was 12. The engines were rated for rapid repositioning in emergency deployment scenarios. The cargo holds were modular, built to carry whatever a humanitarian emergency required. The onboard computer network included system labeled emergency resource allocation network designed to coordinate response across multiple simultaneous crisis points. Cho walked the frame of it every evening. After the construction crew left, just him and the ship and the quiet of the berth. He put his hand on the hull, cold. He left it there for a moment, then he went back inside, sat down at the table, covered in schematics, and kept working. 3 months after the signing, Huron filed his quarterly report to the Conclave Oversight Committee. Human compliance confirmed. Fleet. Decommissioning proceeding on schedule. No evidence of prohibited vessel. Construction in any inspected facility. Threat level negligible. He read it. Back once, then he submitted it. Got a confirmation message. Filed the confirmation. He looked at the closed window on his screen for a moment. He had built the framework, argued it through 12 sessions of the conclave, gotten the most dangerous species in the known galaxy to sign a document written in their own words. He had won. He closed the window, moved to the next task. In Berth 7, the HRV Gentle Hand took shape. 300 m of hull, 12 layers of rated plating, modular holds that could be reconfigured in under 4 hours. Engines that, when they were finally tested, produced a hum that you felt in your chest before you heard it in your ears. Cho was not proud of it. He was not ashamed of it either. It was work. The kind of work that had a specific shape to it, a shape that only made sense if you had read the accords very carefully and understood exactly where the lines were drawn and exactly how much space existed between them. He turned the lights off when he left. Each night, the ship sat in the dark of the berth, cold and quiet, and grew 3 years past the way that slow water moves, quiet on the surface, doing serious work underneath. The inspection teams came every quarter. Thrail of the Vel Collective was the lead inspector for the human construction sector, and she was careful in the way that only truly organized creatures are careful. She had 2 sets of hands, one large pair for carrying things, one small pair near her collar that she used for detail work. She always had a recording device in the small hands. She took notes on everything. She was not unkind. She was not unfair. She was the kind of person who believed that rules were rules and rules meant what they said, and the world was therefore a manageable place. Cho met her every quarter at the entrance to the Ganymede facility. He brought 2 cups of coffee. She didn't drink coffee, she never had, but she always accepted the cup and held it. And he had stopped trying to figure out why. The first inspection, 14 months after the signing, lasted 3 days. Thrail moved through every berth, every construction bay, every storage unit. She scanned hull ratings. She reviewed engine classifications. She compared manifest numbers to framework specifications and made neat, careful notes. She found nothing wrong. She found nothing wrong because there was nothing wrong. Every specification was exactly within the boundaries set by the accords. Cho walked beside her and answered every question she had. He answered fully. He answered honestly. He did not volunteer anything she didn't ask about. She was thorough. He was patient. They moved well together in the way that 2 people with opposing purposes sometimes do. On the morning of the 2nd day, Thrail stopped in front of the HRV Gentle Hand. The ship sat in berth 7 like a hill. 300 m, the whole plates were smooth and uniform, the kind of surface that took a lot of material to make that calm. She looked at it for a long time. The whole plating on this vessel, she said, class give maximum, as agreed. That's right, Cho said. There are 12 layers of it. Cho checked his data pad. The check was not necessary. He knew the numbers. He checked anyway, in the way of a man who wants to appear to be checking. Accords specify grade, not quantity. Thrail looked at the ship, then she looked at her notes. The cargo holds, she said, Rated for humanitarian payload. They are modular. Humanitarian situations vary. You might need medical supplies. You might need food. You might need construction materials to rebuild after a disaster. Fixed holds can't handle that range. He paused. We want to be useful in as many situations as possible. She wrote something on her device. He couldn't see what it was. And the engine rating, she said, rapid. Repositioning for emergency deployment. When there's a crisis, you need to get there fast. The repositioning speed falls within the upper range of what a combat-rated drive could achieve. It falls within what the framework allows. She looked at him. He looked back. Yes, she said, it does, she wrote. Something else filed it, moved on. The quarterly report from that visit was 4 pages. On the final page, in a section labeled Additional Observations, Thrail had written 3 lines. Several vessel specifications approach maximum allowable thresholds across multiple categories simultaneously. This pattern merits monitoring. No current violation identified. The committee received it, filed it. Nobody read the additional observations. Cho didn't sleep much during those years, not because of guilt, not because of worry. He didn't sleep because the work moved too fast inside his head. When he lay down, and staying awake was easier than chasing it. He had a cot in the back office of berth 7 that he used when he didn't make it home. The blanket on it was gray and thin. He'd had it for 8 years and would not replace it. It was like the pen Voss kept, a small, stupid piece of loyalty to something that didn't deserve it. He would lie there and stare at the ceiling and think about the Accords, not with anger, not with excitement, with the focused, methodical attention of a person doing a puzzle that only they can see the full shape of. He would trace the language in his head, the definitions, the thresholds, the technical specifications that humanity had submitted and that the conclave had read and approved without asking who wrote them or why they were written the way they were. He thought about the modular holds, layered plating, the targeting system that allocated resources in emergencies. He thought about what fit. He thought about what didn't need to fit. Yet, by the end of the 2nd year, there were 11 humanitarian response vessels, 6 deep survey explorers, large, fast ships built for long-range operations in extreme stellar environments, their hulls reinforced for proximity to radiation sources, their sensors rated for resolution that could map a planet from the far edge of its system. 3 diplomatic carriers. These were the ones that made Thrail pause longest. On her inspections, they were unarmed as the Accords required. They carried ambassadors and their staffs. The staffs were large. The staff members had specific skill sets. Their titles were things like Senior Security Coordinator and Field Operations Specialist. Thrail filed a note about the staffing composition on her 6th visit. It was 4 lines in the additional observation section. Nobody read it. Voss visited the yards on the last day of the 2nd year. She walked the berths. She looked at the ships, the staggered rows of them growing in there. Berths waiting. She just walked in. Looked the way she sometimes looked at maps, not studying them, just letting the shape of the thing settle in her mind. Cho walked with her. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They had the particular shorthand of 2 people who had worked together for a long time towards something that neither of them fully said out loud. At the end of the walk at the entrance, she stopped. "How long?" she said, not a question or. It was a question, but not the kind that needed an answer from him. He answered it anyway. "Not long," he said. She nodded once, walked to her transport. 3 weeks later, the Vel Collective announced the annexation of the Kihara. Reach 12 star systems, 3 human allied colony worlds inside the boundary. Kihara Station, 12,000 civilians, including 4,000 humans, cut off from supply lines by a Vel blockade that went up without warning on a Tuesday morning. The conclave issued a formal statement. The statement was 2 paragraphs. It expressed deep concern. It called for dialogue. It noted that the situation was being monitored closely. Voss was in her office when the statement came through. She read it at her desk, the desk with the box of cheap blue pens on the corner. She read it all the way to the end. She set it down, picked up her coffee, drank it. The coffee had gone cold while she was reading. She drank it anyway. Outside the window, the Ganymede facility's lights were on, night shift. The berths were lit up, the ships visible in them like answers waiting for someone to ask the right question. She finished the coffee, put the cup down. The Vel blockade went up around Kihara Station on a Tuesday. By Friday, the station's food supply projections showed a shortfall in 31 days. Water recycling was holding, medical reserves were not. Kihara Station had been built to house 8,000 people. It was currently housing 12,000 because the 3 colony worlds in the Reach had been pulling people off surface since the Vel forces arrived. People moved toward population centers in a crisis. It is one of the more predictable things about them. The conclave was in emergency session. Emergency sessions of the conclave took time. The Vel knew this. They had planned for this. They had written the calculus of it into their strategy with care. By the time the conclave finished deliberating, the humans inside Kihara Station would need a solution badly. Enough that they might accept one that cost them something. The 3 colony worlds, for example. Or the recognition of Vel jurisdiction over the Reach. Small concessions, reasonable ones in the language of bodies that move slowly and call the slowness wisdom. 6 hours out from Kihara Station, 43 ships dropped out of FTL. Commander Rhea Akefer stood on the bridge of the HRV Gentle Hand and looked at the Vel blockade on her sensor display. She had commanded warships for 11 years. Before the Accords, she had been the executive officer of the ENS Fortitude. During the action at the Dravon corridor, which most people outside the Navy had never heard of and which Akefer never talked about, she had the posture of a person who had spent a long time in spaces where posture mattered, straight without being stiff, still without being rigid. Her title was Lead Humanitarian Coordinator. Her ship was a humanitarian response vessel. Both of these things were true. The fleet behind her was 43 HRVs, 18 deep survey explorers, 9 diplomatic carriers, their hulls carrying personnel described in all filed manifests as security coordination staff and associated operational equipment. Not one. The sensor officer called out the Vel formation, 14 ships in a standard blockade spread positioned between the FTL threshold and the station. Military ships, real ones with the classifications to prove it, heavy hulls, weapons arrays, the kind of ships that had a reason to look the way they looked. Akefer studied the display. Time to effective range, she said. 42 minutes at current speed. She nodded. Maintain current speed. The Vel commander hailed them at 30 minutes out. The voice that came through was even, controlled, and carried the specific tone of someone who expected to be obeyed. Unidentified human convoy, you are approaching a restricted zone under Vel collective administrative authority. Your vessels are not classified for military engagement under the Cathara Accords. You will halt and submit to inspection before proceeding. Akefer let the message finish, looked at her comms officer. We are responding to declared humanitarian crisis, she said. 12,000 civilians on Kahari Station, including 4,000 human nationals, are in a supply emergency. We are providing emergency humanitarian relief, standard protocol under conclave. Emergency provisions, Article 7. Silence for a moment. Then you will halt. Akefer looked at the display at the station at the 14 ships sitting between her and 12,000 people. No, she said. At 20 minutes out, the diplomatic carriers opened their holds. The survey auxiliary units launched in groups of 8. They were logged in the ship's manifest as geological survey platforms, remote sensing drones used to map terrain and subsurface composition. In regions of scientific interest, their payloads were listed as geological survey instruments, geological survey instruments that were dense and heavy, and released at the right vector from the right range would do something very specific to the right target. They were not weapons. They were not classified as weapons. They had never been classified as weapons. They worked like weapons. At 15 minutes out, the point defense systems on the HRVs came online. Point defense was allowed under the Accords. All civilian ships were permitted basic debris deflection systems for protection against micrometeorites and space debris, which was a real and documented hazard in any region of active space travel. The systems on the HRV Gentle Hand and her 42 sister ships were rated with allowable parameters. All 43 sets of them were linked, coordinated, running through the emergency resource allocation network, which identified threat vectors and allocated response assets across the fleet in real time. The Vel fired first. They had to. Their commander looked at the sensor display, looked at what was coming, and understood enough of what he was seeing to know he could not let it get closer. He fired. The point defense systems answered. The emergency resource allocation network ran the numbers in fractions of a second. 43 ships, 14 threats, optimal distribution of response assets across the spread of incoming fire. It was very good at the numbers. It had been built to be very good at the numbers. The engagement lasted 19 minutes. The Vel formation broke on the 12th. By the 15th, 3 Vel ships had pulled back past the FTL threshold. By the 19th, the remaining 11 were moving away from the station in an unorganized pullback that was not a retreat in the formal sense, but was a retreat in every sense that mattered. Akefer called no maneuvers she didn't need to call. She spoke in short, clean sentences. She watched the display and made decisions and communicated them. The bridge crew moved around her the way a machine moves, each part doing its specific thing, the whole thing doing what it was for. She was very good at this. It was what she had always been good at. It did not have a name that appeared in any official document related to humanitarian response operations. She didn't need it to. It was during the pullback when the last Warships were clearing the engagement zone and the gentle hand was moving toward the station that the comms officer put a hand up. Civilian frequency. Kahari Station, station side broadcast. Wide range. She hesitated. It's a kid. Akefer looked over. The comms officer played it. A child's voice, young 7 maybe. 8 maybe younger. The voice had the particular quality of a child trying to sound calm because they had been told by adults to be calm and were trying to honor that. Is that the humans? Are those the human ships? A lower voice in the background, adult. Too far from the mic to make out the words. The child again. Somebody said, they don't have warships anymore. Somebody said they don't, and then the feed ended. The child had moved away from the mic, or the adult had moved them. Akefer didn't flinch. She was mid-approach, calling corrections, watching the docking vectors align on the display. Her hands were on the console in front of her, and she called the next maneuver adjustment in the same voice she had been using for the last 19 minutes. Her right hand, flat on the surface of the console, went very still. It stayed still for a long time. She didn't look at it. Kahari Station received its first supply transfer at 3:40 station time. Medical supplies first, then food, then water processing components for the secondary recyclers that had been running at reduced capacity for 6 days. 12,000 people. Akefer stood in the docking bay during the first transfer and watched the cargo move. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. The Vel Collective filed a formal protest with the conclave within the hour. The protest stated that humanity had deployed a war fleet in direct violation of the Cathara Accords and demanded an emergency review and formal sanctions. The conclave acknowledged the protest, began a review. The review required checking the classification documents for every vessel in the human response fleet, every ship, every system, every specification, every engine rating, armor grade, and piece of equipment filed under its proper name in its proper category, against the precise language of the Accords. The review committee worked through the night. They found exactly what was there to find. They called an emergency session. The emergency session would require all parties, including Admiral Saravas, who was already on a transport, already dressed, who had been ready for this particular meeting for 3 years. The chamber was fuller this time. 81 delegates, every seat at every table occupied. There were observers in the standing areas of the back, diplomatic staff, legal advisors, creatures from worlds that were not part of the conclave but had interests in what happened here. The room had the feeling of a space that understood its own importance and was responding to that understanding by making sure everyone who should be present was present. Voss stood at the center of it, same posture as 3 years ago, same jacket. The pen was in her pocket. She had not been asked to speak. Yet Euron was still speaking. He had been speaking for 40 minutes. He was very prepared. He laid it out in order, the engagement record from Kahari, the fleet composition, ship by ship, system by system, the point defense networks and what they had done, the survey platforms and what They had carried the diplomatic carriers and their staff, manifests and the particular professional backgrounds of the people, listed as security coordinators. He had done his research. He had found the gap between what the things were called and what the things had done, and he was building it into a picture that he wanted the room to see clearly. The room was seeing it clearly. Voss listened to all of it. She had a notepad. She wrote nothing on it. The notepad was there because people with notepads look like people who are paying careful attention, and she was paying careful attention, and the notepad was just the visible part of that. When Euron finished, the chair of the session asked Voss if she wished to respond. She did. She stepped forward. "Show me the line," she said. The room was quiet. In the text of the Accords, show me the definition, the precise technical threshold that separates a warship from the vessels we brought to Kahari. Point to it, read it to the room, show me which side of it we were standing on, and I will tell you whether we violated it. Euron was still. His 4 eyes did not move. "You built warships," he said. "You dressed them in different names." "Show me the line," she said again. Same words, same voice. He did not show her the line. He could not show her the line. Show presented. Next, he had a display screen and a set of documents that he moved through in order, and he talked the room through each one the way a person explains a simple thing that has become complicated only because people haven't looked at it carefully enough. He was not aggressive. He was not theatrical. He had the patience of someone who had been waiting for this particular conversation for a long time and found, now that it was here, that it was going exactly as expected. The HRV hull plating Class 4 as specified by the Accords. The quantity had not been specified by the Accords. He showed the relevant section. He read it aloud. He asked if anyone disputed the reading. No one disputed the reading. The engine ratings within permitted specifications for civilian repositioning. He showed the numbers. He showed where the ceiling was and where the gentle hand flex sat in relation to it. Within the ceiling, the point defense systems permitted debris deflection, micrometeorite protection rated within the civilian allowance, the coordination network, and emergency resource allocation system. He showed the original filing. He showed the inspection records, Thrales, quarterly reports, each one confirming compliance. She noted the pattern. He said in the additional observation section she recommended monitoring. He moved to the next document. The monitoring did not change the classification of any vessel. He kept going. He went for 40 minutes, and he did not raise his voice once, and when he finished, the room was completely silent. The silence had a texture to it. It was not the silence of people who had been persuaded. It was not the silence of people who were angry. It was the silence of people who had looked at something they didn't fully understand and found that they were more uncomfortable with the thing they did understand. They understood patience. They understood 3 years of quiet work, of inspections passed, of vessels named with careful and neutral words, of a species that had signed a document and then immediately and precisely mapped every space inside it. The patience was what frightened them. They could have argued with anger. They could have argued with defiance. They had no argument against patience. Euron stood again. He looked at Voss the way Person looks at something they have been trying to solve for a long time and have finally accepted they will not solve in the way they intended. You planned this. From the signing, he said. Voss said. Nothing. She did not deny it. She did not confirm it. You never intended to disarm. We disarmed exactly as agreed. That is not. He stopped, started again. His translation matrix was working hard. That is not what disarming means. It is not what we intended. You understood. What we intended, you intended to use. Our definitions, she said, you did use. Our definitions, every word in the technical framework was submitted by us. You approved it. He looked at her. Urine, her voice didn't change, didn't sharpen or rise. It just landed in the room. Paid attention to where it landed. You asked us to stop building warships. We stopped. We will continue to stop. One beat. You didn't ask us not to build something else. At recess, the corridor outside the chamber was nearly empty. Voss sat on a bench along the far wall. The corridor had a narrow window that looked out onto an observation deck and, beyond it, a view of the station's outer ring. She looked at that for a while. Cho came out 10 minutes after her. He didn't ask if she was all right. He sat down beside her. The corridor had a low hum, air systems machinery, the kind of background noise that stops being a noise and becomes part of the silence. After a while, she said, 11 minutes. Cho said nothing. We were 11 minutes at Vornax. They built that station for 11 years. She looked at the window, at the outer ring. And then we were 11 minutes. He didn't say it wasn't her fault. He didn't say the station had been a military installation, that the engagement was justified, that she had followed orders, or that the orders had been right. He knew she wasn't asking him to say any of those things. She wasn't asking anything. She was just saying a number out loud to someone who had been there. 2, we're good, he said. She looked at the window a moment longer. We're good, she said. They went back in. The conclave deliberated for 2 hours. When they came back, the chair read the decision in a voice that was very careful to be neutral. No violation of the Cathara Accords had been established. The human response fleet had operated within the technical boundaries of the framework as written. Kahari's station situation had constituted a humanitarian emergency. Under conclave provisions, the VEL protest was not upheld. However, the chair continued. The conclave found that the existing technical framework contained gaps that required urgent revision. In the interest of clarity and mutual security, the conclave invited all parties, including humanity, to participate in a full renegotiation of the Accord's technical definitions. Uren looked at the human delegation. Voss was already nodding, graciously, agreeably. She and Cho exchanged one look, brief, quick, the kind of look that doesn't need words because the words had already been worked out years ago. His translation matrix still had no word for what he saw in it. He thought about trying to find one. Renegotiation took 3 months. 12 species, 20 human delegates, 1,700 hours of combined session time across 40 working meetings, 9 formal sessions, and 1 extended recess that lasted 11 days while the VEL Collective reviewed its position on 2 specific clauses. The new framework was comprehensive. It was detailed. It defined warship class, vessels across 6 categories and 14 subcategories. It set hard ceilings on armor grade and Quantity. It defined weapon systems with a specificity that the original Accords had never come close to covering. Kinetic platforms, directed energy, applications, coordinated targeting, networks, and the specific parameters of point defense systems when operating in coordinated multi-vessel formations. It was, by any honest measure, a much better document than the one it replaced. The conclave was proud of it. Humanity had participated in perfect good faith. That was the important part. That was the part that would take the other 11 species a long time to fully understand. In the working sessions, the human delegates had flagged loopholes. Not all of them. No one finds all of them, not even the people who know where to look. But many. They had pointed to sections of draft language that were ambiguous and said this could be read in more than one way. We should tighten this. They had proposed stricter ceilings in areas where the other delegations had been content to accept loose language. They had, at 3 separate points, pushed for definitions more restrictive than what the Vel delegation had originally proposed. The conclave found this encouraging. It was taken as a sign of genuine cooperation, of a humanity that had learned something from Kehari and wanted to demonstrate it. The Vel were less sure. Uran sat in his 18th working session and watched the human delegates and felt the shape of something he couldn't name. The loopholes they flagged were real loopholes. The tightened language they proposed was genuinely better. He could not find an error in any of it. He could only find the feeling, persistent and quiet, that the things they were helping to close were not the things they intended to use. He filed nothing about this feeling. There was nothing to file. The new accords were signed on a Thursday. The ceremony was smaller than the first. 143 delegates instead of 81. No observers in the standing areas. The conclave had decided that a smaller room would produce a better atmosphere for what they were calling collaborative step forward. Voss signed again with the same pen, the same cheap blue pen that bled ink onto her thumb that she wiped on the inside of her sleeve. Uran watched her do it. He had watched her do it 3 years ago, and the gesture had meant nothing to him at the time. Now he thought about it. The same pen, same brand maybe, same deliberate choice to bring it, a small, cheap, stubborn piece of continuity. He didn't know what it meant. He suspected it meant something. The reception was held in a long room on the station's upper level with a view of the outer ring. There were drinks from 12 worlds arranged on tables and groups of delegates standing in arrangements that looked casual and were not. Uran found near the farm window. She was standing alone, looking out at the view. She had a drink in her hand that she was not drinking. He had noticed that she did that, carried drinks without consuming them, in the way of a person who wanted to have something in their hand at social events, so that their hands had a purpose. He stood beside her. For a moment they both looked at the view. "You will do it again," he said, not an accusation, more like something a person says when they have stopped fighting the shape of a thing and are simply naming it. The next emergency, the next crisis. You will find the space in these words. 2. We spent 3 months building a wall. You helped us build it. You were very helpful. We were, she said. And there is a door in the wall that we cannot see. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She looked out the window at the outer ring. Then what was the point of any of it? He said, the first Accord's 3 years, Kahari 3 more months, if the result is always that you find the space we didn't seal. What was the point? She thought about this honestly. He could see that she was thinking about it honestly, and that was almost worse than if she had smiled or deflected. The point, she said, was that you needed to feel safe. He looked at her. Not to be safe, she said, to feel it. The conclave needed that the thing that happened at Vornex 4 was contained, that there was a document that said so, that the document meant something. She turned the glass slowly in her hand. People make better decisions when they are not afraid. You made better decisions these 3 years than you would have made if you were still afraid the way you were after Vornex. The Kahari annexation was a mistake. Even your own delegates said so in session. You made that mistake because you had started to feel safe, and the safety made you careless, not because the Accords failed because they worked. Urin was quiet. And the door in the wall, he said, has not been opened, she said. It won't be opened, not unless someone does something like Kahari again, and if they do, then it will be opened very quickly and in the direction of the problem. He looked at the view, at the stars beyond it and the space between them, and the world sitting in that space, some of which had been afraid of humanity for 40 years and had built their fear into a document and called it law. Did it work? He said. The first Accords, the compliance years. Did it work the way you planned? She considered the question. Kahari Station is resupplied, she said. 12,000 people are alive who might not have been. The veil pulled back from the reach. The conclave held. She paused. Yes, it worked. And the next crisis will be handled by ships that are not warships, by ships that are exactly what their manifests say they are, she said. Every time. Cho was already on the shuttle when the reception was still going. He had attended the signing and then left. Receptions were not his environment. He was better in rooms with machinery than rooms with people. And there was work waiting in the berths at Ganymede that he was already turning over in his head. He had the new Accords on his data pad. He had been reading them since the final draft, which he had helped write. He knew every section. He had helped close 14 loopholes in the working sessions. He opened the document now and went to the sections that the working sessions had not touched, the sections where the language was still soft in ways that were not obvious unless you knew what to look for, the sections that described things that did not yet exist and had therefore not been defined precisely enough to matter. They did not exist yet. They would. He turned to his schematics. New ones, not the HRV Gentle Hand and her sisters, not the survey explorers or the diplomatic carriers, something different, something that fit in the new spaces the new Accords had accidentally left. He worked. The shuttle moved through space, and the stars outside the window were the same stars they always were, indifferent and permanent. And somewhere in the Kahari reach, a child who had heard a voice on a civilian frequency 3 months ago slept through the night without waking. The child did not know about Cho. Cho did not know about the child. Both of them, for completely different reasons, felt safe. And in the quiet bursts of Ganymede, in the dark, the next thing took shape.